Today at shopdap.com, we're going to be talking about German versus Mexican built VWs. Okay, so this conversation's kind of been going on in the VW community for a long time, ever since VW started building vehicles in Mexico. And so what actually inspired this was there was an article recently put out by VW Vortex about VW concerns around the tariffs that they're talking about in regards to importation from Mexico, because importation from Mexico would potentially create a more expensive Mexican built vehicle. And so people are talking about that being generally something that they didn't like anyway, and so they'd prefer it being built either in Germany or some people were saying in the US. And really what I wanted to touch on was a couple things. Vehicles have been built in Mexico for the GTI, the current Mark 7, since the Mark 7. Previous generations were built in some Mexico, some Germany, and then Brazil before that. And so the general consensus has always been that, for whatever reason, that the German vehicles are better built than the Mexican vehicles. And it's something that it's really important to understand, that there is a discussion about that generally makes the assumption that there's actually some fact to back that up. And I'm not aware of at this point. Maybe, feel free if anybody has any facts that actually does back that up, be sure to leave in the comments below. But I have never seen any facts to back that up. And actually, a long time ago when I was at the dealer, when the B6 Passat and Mark 5s were new, there was actually data showing that the German-built vehicles actually had more issues than the Mexican-built ones. And it's important to understand what that means. When they're talking about issues in regards to production plants, what they're actually referring to is issues coming off the line as far as build issues, inconsistency in quality, or mismanufacturing of the vehicle being assembled, not the actual product of the vehicle being the parts that fail or any issues around that car. It's important to understand that cars are built in a specific place, but the sum of the parts that make them up were not made in that place. Any car built in Mexico doesn't have Mexican-built parts, although there may be some parts built in Mexico. As a general rule, most parts, especially anything mechanical, electrical, that type of stuff, is almost always built somewhere else from a multitude of places. All the parts that make up your car come from all over the world, whether it be Hungary or Poland, Germany, Czechoslovakia. All those countries are very common to manufacture different parts on VW and Audis. Some parts, again, built in Mexico, other parts, all over the place. So it's important to understand that just because a vehicle is made in Mexico does not mean that the actual parts that assemble that vehicle are made in Mexico. So if you talk about, let's say, failures of parts around a vehicle, that doesn't reflect on the plant it was made in, because they didn't make the parts. All they did was assemble the car and put it together. So for years, it's always been a talk that was actually the case, that German-built cars are always better, Mexican-built cars are garbage. And again, because I had some data points back from when I was the dealer, I did have some connections with people who mentioned that to me, that there was actual data to back up that the German-built vehicles were actually coming off the line with more issues than the Mexican-built ones. Now, it's important to know that this, for me, is always not a direct reflection of the plant it's built in, but obviously how the vehicle is designed, the engineering that went into it, and then obviously the parts actually used to actually make up the vehicle. And then this kind of discussion that I had with one specific gentleman mentioned, he was referring to the Mark 7, and he felt like there was a lot of compromises with the Mark 7 being a lesser quality vehicle, and that's why he didn't care for that, because he wanted a German-built vehicle, and because the Mark 7 was a lesser quality vehicle. I can say this, that the big part of the push in the recent years from VW to manufacture, not just in Mexico, but to make the cars more affordable, which also included the Chattanooga plant and just local production to make the cars specifically for the US market. Some enthusiasts, and a lot of enthusiasts, feel as though they've been dumbed down and it's being ruined per se, because they're taking away some of the nice features that made VW different. And all of this was in an effort to make the brand more mainstream. You know, there was a time when I was at the dealer that if you were to compare, let's say, a Passat to an Accord, the comparable vehicle would be so far apart in price they wouldn't even be remotely competitive. Like, for example, a Passat might be $5,000 more expensive for a comparable vehicle, which would price out VW out of the market in most times when they were trying to offer those products to people, and which made VW a really narrow brand in the US, and they were trying to change that, recognizing the market. And that, honestly, generally, most consumers don't care about those things. Now, do some enthusiasts find those things very important? 100%. The Mark 6 Jetta was actually a great example of this, because the Mark 6 Jetta, when it was first introduced, was VW's first kind of price-conscious vehicle, which is why they offered the new 2-liter 2-point slow non-turbo engine that had a beam rear and drum brakes, and it was a very entry-level cost vehicle, and frankly, it was cheap. And for most VW and Audi enthusiasts, they hated that car because it felt like it took away everything that was good about the brand to make a nice car. And a lot of people go to VW because it is a nicer car than a lot of the comparable models in that price point. And definitely VW made some concessions to try to make the brand more mainstream. But they also still offered that same car in higher product lines to offer people like enthusiasts the GLI version, which it had an independent rear and obviously bigger brakes and the whole deal. And it was a nice car. So then in regards to Mark 7, same kind of concept. They're trying to make a more mainstream GTI, and frankly, they succeeded. They hit a home run as far as I'm concerned. There are some people who can say there are concessions about this and that. Frankly, I think it's overall a nice car, well-built vehicle, and issues are relatively low at this point, minus a few things. But if you take a look at these sales numbers, comparatively by year, the Mark 7 is by far the biggest home run, and they've sold the most Mark 7s per year out of any other GTI in any recent history. So for that reason, I completely understand why some people would feel like there's some quality concessions. Two things I say about that. Maybe that's true, maybe it's perception. I don't really know. I personally feel like the Mark 7 is a solid quality build car, but more importantly, performance-wise, it's leaps and bounds above previous models, I think, making it a just overall better GTI than the previous ones. I understand why you might want a German-built vehicle, and obviously the Golf R is that option for those people who specifically want German-built. It is going to be, although it's something to keep in mind, that car is German-built, but it's still a Mark 7, so it's still made up of very much the similar parts that you would find on a Mexican-built GTI. So thank you so much for watching, and feel free to leave your comments and feedback about this Mexican versus German-built VWs.